What's your best MJ story?
One of my favorite MJ story is, since this is out there, we're in Chicago.
There are mistakes that mark you forever, not because they change your career, but because they show you exactly who you are. A 19-year-old rookie, newly arrived in the league, decided to open his mouth on the wrong night. He didn't do it out of malice, nor out of ego. He did it because he still didn't understand that, in basketball, there are silences that are worth more than any word. That night, he played in front of his people with his whole neighborhood watching him from the stands. He had his heart on fire, light legs, and the feeling that he could take on anyone. And for a moment, he believed it was true. What came next wasn't a game. It was a lesson disguised as punishment. The guy he challenged didn't yell, didn't respond, he just looked at him, and from that moment, everything changed. No one in that arena spoke again, and he from that day on never did either.
You know, it's my rookie year, the second half of the year. You know how you're not caught on now, right? Now you got your little 1-2 moves, you getting them off, right? Now you got some confidence, right? So I'm in that.
It was November of 1996, and the cold in Chicago felt different. For most people, it was just another regular season game, but for him, it was much more than that. Kevin Garnett was returning to his hometown. He was playing in front of his people, in front of the friends who had watched him grow up on the open courts of Farragut Academy, the same ones who still believed that this skinny kid with endless arms was the future. That night wasn't a game, it was a test. But before reaching the stadium, something had shaken him. One day earlier, one of his best friends had suffered a terrible accident. Garnett had visited him in the hospital and had seen him connected to a metal halo, motionless, yet still smiling. That image stayed with him all day. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten well, and yet he walked into the United Center with his head on fire. It was as if everything he felt, the fear, the sadness, the anger, the need to prove himself, had merged into a single impulse. When the game started, that impulse turned into fire. Garnett ran, yelled, beat his chest, urged everyone on. He was a 19-year-old rookie, but he played as if the entire world were watching, and in some way, it was. In the stands, there were dozens of familiar faces from the neighborhood, friends, family, even high school teachers, people who had witnessed the impossible, that a kid from their poor, forgotten area had gone straight from school to the NBA, and he wanted that night to be perfect. For 3 quarters it was, the team was competing, the atmosphere was electric, and his teammate Isaiah Ryder was on fire. Everything seemed to flow, but what Garnett didn't know, what no one had explained to him yet, was that in that league there was something more dangerous than losing, provoking the wrong player. And just when the game was starting to heat up, he did it. Kevin Garnett was never a normal player. He didn't know how to play calmly. Since high school, his thing wasn't perfect technique or polished fundamentals. It was fire, that kind of energy that makes people uncomfortable, that spreads, that sometimes borders on madness. He didn't understand the idea of saving energy or respecting hierarchies. In the streets, that was a way to die. He grew up in an environment where if you lowered your head, they ran over you. That's why when he got to the NBA, he didn't think about adapting. He thought about leaving his mark, and he was 19, coming straight from high school, unfiltered, without a single year of college to learn the unwritten rules of the game. He was the first of a generation that skipped the whole process, and that made him different. He arrived in a world of grown men who looked at him with suspicion, and his response was simple: compete harder. In practices, he yelled, beat his chest, talked to himself. It wasn't an act, it was instinct. That instinct made him unique, but also dangerous, because when you're not afraid, you don't see the limits, and when you don't see the limits, you end up crossing them without realizing it. Garnett wasn't disrespectful, he was impulsive. He lived in a permanent state of intensity where every play felt personal, every opponent an obstacle to prove something. If someone told him, relax, he took it as a challenge. If someone pushed him, he pushed twice as hard. That night in Chicago, with everything he was carrying, his fire was higher than ever. The adrenaline of playing in front of his people mixed with exhaustion, emotion, and the need to prove he wasn't just a promise. There was something almost symbolic in his attitude. The kid from the poor neighborhood facing the system, the established respect, the names that seemed untouchable. But in that intensity, in that impulse to become someone, lay the mistake, because when your fire has no control, it can light you up or burn you, and that night, Garnett still didn't know which of the two was going to happen.
I'm playing, right? But JR is having a good game. You know, JR Mike.
JR Ryder.
JR Ryder. Shout out to JR Ryder, right?
Easy Ryder.
So I'm like, so as we come out the timeout, just I'm on, y'all. I can't even explain it. I was just like, keep killing that nigga, yo. You killing that nigga, boning him, yo, straight up. You having a good game, Joe. Keep going. But it was on some just fly by, he was like, yeah, you too.
The game was balanced, but the atmosphere was pure fire. Garnett was playing loose, confident, feeling that he could finally dominate the big guys. Every possession was a message: I can be here, I belong here. Isaiah Ryder joined him in that competitive trance, hitting impossible shots, gesturing, lifting the crowd. Chicago roared, and in the middle of that noise, Garnett felt something close to invincibility. From the bench, he started shouting phrases like someone encouraging a friend without measuring the impact of the words. "Keep going, you're killing him, he can't stop you," he yelled. And the arena froze for a second. He didn't notice right away. For him, it was just a way to motivate his teammate, but the voice traveled farther than it should have. It reached the ears of someone who wasn't used to hearing that kind of phrase. The silence that followed was strange. One of those that you feel on your skin, not in your ears. Ryder glanced at him and said, barely moving his lips, "Shh, shut up." Garnett turned his head and he saw him, standing still, arms on his hips, staring at him. He didn't need announcements, a jersey, or introductions. The number 23 on the other side didn't need to speak to command respect. It was Michael Jordan. And if there was one thing the basketball world had learned over the years, it was that Michael didn't need enemies to play in assassin mode. All it took was a look, the smallest provocation, a stray phrase in the air. Garnett had just given him the spark he looked for every night, an excuse. Jordan smiled, not with irony, but with that expression that warned of a coming storm. He didn't say a word. He didn't raise his voice. He just adjusted his shorts, locked his eyes on Garnett, and went back into the game. That was the signal. And the kid who had shouted from the bench still didn't know he had just ignited hell.
So as I'm walking off, the nigga right here, Mike can hear me, but I don't really give a fuck. So I'm like, so I double back like, yeah, man, keep killing that nigga, yo, you killing that motherfucker. So as I say that, I feel it. Hands on hips, legs locked. Then look, the nigga stabbed me for about 15 seconds.
In that instant, the game changed owners. The air in the United Center became heavier, as if everyone had sensed that something was about to happen. Michael Jordan returned from the timeout with narrowed eyes, hands on his hips, and that dangerous calm only he had before unleashing a massacre. No one in that arena knew exactly what he was going to do, but everyone knew he was going to do it. The next possessions were a practical lesson in what it meant to provoke a competitor of that level. Within minutes, Jordan took absolute control of the game. He didn't raise his voice, didn't respond with gestures, didn't even look at the opposing bench. He just started attacking. One play, two, three, fadeaway, layup, contact jumper. Every possession was a sentence. The Timberwolves didn't know whether to look at the scoreboard or at Garnett's face, which had gone from euphoria to total bewilderment. Jordan wasn't playing, he was punishing. In those 6 or 7 minutes, he hit consecutive shots with a level of ease that seemed unreal. He went from having fewer than 20 points to approaching 40 without blinking. He did everything in silence with that economy of movement that made him look like a predator. He looked at Garnett, looked at Ryder, and then went back to the rim. He didn't need words. The message was in every shot that went in. The crowd, which at first enjoyed the close game, surrendered to the spectacle. Every time the ball left his hands, the arena held its breath. When it went in, the ovation was automatic. It was the same Jordan who had destroyed entire generations of defenders, but with something extra. The motivation of having been challenged. That was his fuel. What was pressure for others was pleasure for him. On the bench, Garnett said nothing. He looked at the floor, looked at the scoreboard, and understood that his voice had come with a price. He tried to hide it, but Ryder noticed. At one point, he murmured something like, "Told you not to talk." It wasn't reproach, it was fear, because deep down they knew that what they were witnessing wasn't just talent, it was a demonstration of hierarchy. Jordan kept going. Perfect mid-range, spin move, pull-up, clean net. Every time he scored, he took a step back without gesturing, without celebrating. He didn't even look for the rival bench's eyes. He just adjusted his mouth guard and went back on defense. The message was clear. It wasn't about winning the game, it was about reminding everyone who was in charge. When the quarter ended, the Bulls were up by a margin impossible to overcome. Jordan had more than 40 points. Garnett still had his 20-something, a good game on paper, but irrelevant compared to the hurricane that had just blown past them. The coach called a timeout, and the rookie walked to the bench in silence. The crowd didn't boo him. There was no need. The punishment had already been delivered. That night, Garnett learned that some players beat you on the scoreboard and others beat you in your head. Jordan had done it in both places.
I was like, Jay, man, my bad, dog. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. He like, it's cool, man. I told you, just shut your ass up, man. You're not fucking.
When the game ended, Garnett didn't know whether to look at the scoreboard or at the floor. He felt like everything that had happened had taken place in fast forward. He entered the court as an energetic rookie and left it feeling small. The adrenaline no longer ran through his body. What he felt now was a strange mix of shame and clarity. That uncomfortable clarity that appears only when the hit is so big there is no way to justify it. On the bench, no one said a word. His teammates glanced at him sideways, some with a told you so expression. Isaiah Ryder came over, hit him lightly on the leg, and murmured, "It's okay, we all learn like this." It didn't sound like comfort, it sounded like reality. Garnett nodded, took a deep breath, and lowered his head. In the distance, he saw Jordan leaving the court, greeting calmly as if nothing special had happened. But to him, something had happened. He had felt it in his own flesh. In the locker room, the sound of the showers mixed with the murmurs of reporters, creating that heavy atmosphere that exists only after a beating. Garnett didn't speak. He sat in front of his locker, towel over his head, and replayed in his mind every phrase he had said from the bench, every look he had exchanged, every shot that had gone in without touching the rim. Everything was so clear now, it hurt. It wasn't the scoreboard that weighed on him, it was having crossed a line he didn't know existed. At that moment, he understood something that isn't taught in practice and can't be learned from watching film. He understood that respect in the NBA isn't demanded, it's earned, and that if you disrespect someone like Jordan, what you get in return isn't a lecture, it's a lesson. The worst kind, the one given without words. Years later, in an interview, Garnett would say that day changed the way he existed in the league, that he never spoke again without thinking, that he learned some players didn't need provocation to compete, and that provoking them only accelerated your punishment. He didn't say it with resentment, he said it with admiration, because deep down, being destroyed by Jordan was a kind of baptism, a pain that turned you into someone different. And that night, the kid who had arrived in the NBA shouting and beating his chest left the court in silence, but that silence, over time, became respect.
So you got in between the Gatorade there where you like, damn, and next thing you know, we over there like this. That's it. And Mike came down, okay, young fella, okay, damn, young fella, damn, y'all done? Damn, young fella. Never talk shit to Mike ever again in life. I seen him at All-Star, apologize, man, you know, I was fucking, man. I ain't never did it to nobody else, but I had that, man, look, respect, man.
That's what's up.
Over time, Garnett understood that that night in Chicago hadn't been a humiliation, it had been a right. One of those moments only the great ones experience and remember with gratitude. At first, he took it as a personal embarrassment, but as the seasons went by, something changed. Every time he crossed paths with Jordan, the treatment was different. There was no longer that edge of tension, there was something closer to respect. Jordan had noticed him from the beginning. He knew who that skinny kid with endless arms was, the one who had come straight out of high school without college, with an intensity that overwhelmed everyone. In interviews from that same season, when asked about Garnett, Michael didn't diminish him. He said something few rookies ever heard from his mouth: he's good, really good, he's learning, he's training on the fly. In the silent hierarchy of the NBA, that was a blessing. Not everyone received those words from Jordan. And for Garnett, who had felt in his own flesh what Jordan's fury meant, hearing that acknowledgement was almost a closing of the circle. Because deep down, Jordan didn't punish out of arrogance. He did it to measure the soul of those coming behind him. That was the part Garnett understood later, that Jordan didn't just play to win, he played to see who could endure him, who had the fire necessary to look him in the eyes after being burned, and he did. He kept competing, kept growing, kept being that guy who didn't know how to dial down the intensity. Over time, that respect turned into mutual admiration. Jordan saw in Garnett a young reflection of his own hunger, and Garnett saw in him the model of what it meant to be relentless. In a world where everyone talked, the two of them understood the value of silence. That's why when people remember that anecdote, many think it was a story of humiliation. But those who know, those who were there, or who understand how greatness is measured in the NBA, know it was something else. It was the moment when a god of the game decided to test a kid, and the kid, even while losing, proved he belonged at that level. And sometimes, being recognized for the fire that burns you is worth more than any victory. Years passed, and the kid who had once learned his lesson in silence was no longer a rookie. Kevin Garnett was an established star, a leader, an all-star, a player feared for his intensity. He had everything that youthful fire had once promised, but now with control. The rage had become discipline. He no longer yelled without thinking, he chose when to ignite, and yet the memory of that night remained stored somewhere in his mind like an invisible mark. In late 2002, fate prepared a new encounter with the same man who had once shut him up. Michael Jordan was 38 and playing for the Washington Wizards in his second and final NBA stint. He was no longer the same physically, but his mentality was intact. He hadn't lost the instinct, he had simply learned to use it more intelligently. When he crossed paths with Garnett, he recognized him immediately. He looked at him, smiled, and as if no time had passed, shifted back into competition mode. That game was different. There was no hatred, no tension, it was pure respect. But Jordan was still Jordan, and respect for him was also expressed by competing. So he decided to remind Garnett who had been his teacher. Despite being nearly 40 and having a body worn down by time, he began scoring with chilling precision. Impossible shots, spin moves, perfect fadeaways. Everything that once made him invincible was still there. Garnett, already at the peak of his career, didn't back down. He defended with everything, contested every shot, but there was something inevitable in what he was witnessing. It was like seeing a circle close. The kid who had once been silenced by the legend was now facing him with pride, knowing he no longer had anything to prove. When the game ended, they greeted each other without words. Just that kind of look players give each other when they know they've shared something others cannot understand. Jordan, already carrying the sweat of retirement, knew that the kid had learned well. And Garnett, now the veteran for an entire new generation, understood that someday he too would be the mirror in which another young player would see himself. Not every clash between legends and heirs ends in respect, but this one did, because true respect is not born from winning, it's born from having survived the blow. Over the years, that story became part of NBA folklore. It was told 1,000 times in interviews, in podcasts, in documentaries, always with the same ending: the kid who talked too much and the god who silenced him. But what many don't see is that behind the funny anecdote, there is something much deeper. What happened that night wasn't humiliation, it was transmission. Garnett understood it with time. That day, without knowing it, Jordan had taught him what the game meant at its highest level. Not the level of stats or highlights, but the level of mentality. The idea that respect is earned by competing to the limit, and that greatness allows no distractions. Jordan didn't need to beat him. He needed to leave him a message. This is what it costs to be the best. And he did it his way. No speeches, no explanations, just playing. That was the invisible lesson Garnett carried with him years later, when he was already an MVP and a champion with Boston, when the roles had reversed and he was the one setting the intensity standard for the younger players. You could see that something of Jordan lived in the way he was on the court, in that fixed stare, in that way of not forgiving, in that fire that no longer burned but illuminated. Perhaps that's why the story never gets old, because it's not about a game, not even about two players. It's about that invisible line that connects those who compete with their soul. Jordan was the executioner, but also the mirror. Garnett was the victim, but also the apprentice. And together they left a lesson that isn't taught on any court, that sometimes, to belong to history, first you must be part of defeat. Some lose forever, others lose once, and never again. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.